Hey, everybody. Welcome to another great session for AI for All. Today, we're going to be doing, I'm Cody. I'm the head of developer support at Fedi, and I'm helping organize the AI for All. We've got Arun here. Arun's one of the makers who's been pretty active in the Discord so far, and he's been very, very excited to share some of the work that he's done on prompt engineering. So, Arun, you want to give a brief introduction, and then we can kind of talk a little bit about your project and prompt engineering?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Cody. Uh, um, my background, started working on Bitcoin and Lightning um, back in 2020. That's when the Lightning, got started. Um, uh, I was tinkering with the node and trying to figure out how we can make that as a payment method, an alternative payment than the traditional rates on credit card. In 2021, that's when the whole the credit card industry and the banking industry were squeezing on the creators, charging them absurd prices, setting some rules. So that's when we figured, hey, why can't we put up a site with creators can come and put them their creations and then charge for it just with sats. So we linked this website with a Lightning payment, and we called it Starbacker. And we started doing that end of 2021 through 2022. And of course, the payment portion was decentralized, but the content and all the other pieces were all centralized because we were trying to find a solution how we can uh, 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 get it out. And end of 2022 is when we stumbled upon Nostr, and that kind of fit in perfectly with the content creation, where we can make the content creation also decentralized. So then we started building an app for it. Both Android and iOS. We called it Current. And then we included Zaps, we included the Lightning payment. We were able to kind of pull in all the functionality we built so far, and then host it on Nostr protocol, and that's been happening for the last 6 months. While added, definitely the pull from the AI was kind of pulling me towards it, and then obviously now it's a full circle, right? Like you start from Bitcoin, Lightning, Nostr, and then you plug in the AI. Now all of these things complement each other. They are meant to work with each other, and that's kind of hey, this is kind of the thing that we're looking for. So started looking at it, and then definitely the hackathon pushed me into it and said, hey, let's put up something and then start to work on it, and that's how started working on the Pleb AI, which is kind of open source LLM plus you can pay with sats to access it.
Cool, that's amazing. I didn't realize that you were the Starbacker. That was
It's been like different. Like the journey is always you kind of try to meet the same people, but then you put in different shades. But yeah, it's a small community.
Yeah, no, that's cool, and it's been really cool. I've been playing around with some of your demos so far, but
Okay.
yeah. So basically, so Pleb AI, you're doing that chatbot interface. Maybe you could do a quick demo of it at the end for just what you've been working on. But he's also got this presentation here for prompt engineering for AI that you've been because you've been doing a lot of work for just kind of on that front side of making the personas, right, for the different agents and stuff.
Exactly because. So the prompt engineering was one of the first thing that I stumbled upon, and then went through that rabbit hole on you got this big LLM on one side, how do we harness that power, and the answer comes to whatever you feed into. So that's I've been kind of looking into courses and kind of playing with it. So I figured this is much more helpful for many developers who are coming in to the AI side, and it will be a good feeder for them to kind of take it and then run with it. So yeah, let me run through the slides. Okay. let me start with some of the tweets and the on social media, right? So, George Hodge, if you don't know, he's one of the like a big AI person in Silicon Valley. I think he runs the Comma.ai. This is like a visual self-driving, and then recently he's been involved with the tiny computer. And his profile on Instagram, I think he changed to prompt engineer. And then recently he was on a podcast with Lex Friedman, and he explained why he called himself as a prompt engineer, because you're kind of like abstracting the layers one at a time. Like you start with you have to do manual assembly line coding, then you put in the programming language on top, and then you had like some macros and functions on top like Excel that you can do it, and now all you need to do is just ask a question, and then all those things will be done for you. And then the other one that had a huge impact on me is Andre Kakpati, who's been big on AI, and he's works at OpenAI. His tweet is the hardest new programming languages in English. That it took a while for me to realize, but it's a profound shift in this whole development paradigm, because every couple of years, it's obvious, like if you've been a developer for a while, every couple of years, I started my developer journey back in mainframe, it's like 25 years ago, but every 2 years you kind of like stumble upon a new language, you pick it up, that becomes hard, and then you build stuff with it, then you kind of like move on to the next one. But never in this paradigm, English was one of them. And then, we kind of like hit that right here. So and that's nothing but like how you prompt engineer that with your English language is what makes it important. And then the last one I picked up from your podcast, Cody, with Guy Swan, that if the LLM is not giving you the right answer, then you are the problem. I think that's another profound way of looking at it. Say, hey, this thing can give you the right answer. You just need to ask the right question. So with that, what is prompting, right? Like this every, like you look at like ChatGPT, Pi, Claude, all these interaction models. It always starts with the chat box. Say, hey, type in your question. Now your question is whatever you wanted to know at that point. Now, some of the tasks that I want to kind of like get answers to is quite complex, and I want to know how to do that, and that's what is prompting. So the language models are stateless, and they don't have any memory. So every time you kind of give the context, you give what it needs to do or what you're expecting, and then it is just simply predicting the answer for you and then giving the answer back. So it's garbage in and garbage out. Like you put in like some bunch of stuff, it gives out a bunch of stuff on the other side. Ambiguity increases because it's a natural language. Like if you ask me to write a JavaScript or Java program or a Python program, say here's what I need to do, then it's clear, like the language can only handling one way of doing things, and I can kind of like write the program and then feed it. But as here it's English language, which means that I can ask anything and have to ask it in the right way. So let's yeah. So it's as simple as you prompting is nothing but feed them with a bunch of words, and then you get the generated text back from the language models. And I'm sure like people have some knowledge of language model, but just the context, the language models are that we are referring to here are the ChatGPT 3.5, 4, from Google it's Bard, the Facebook, the Llama, they are what they call the large language models. Prompting principles. So this I picked it up in one of the deep learning webinars that Isa and Andrew outlined. In that they make it very clear. It's only like a couple of principles that you need to follow. and then you'll be fine. So the first one is formulation of clear and specific instructions. Because it's in English language, because you wanted to, get an answer, what you want. So start with, explaining it like a 5-year-old, like how, if you want to explain to some kid or someone, hey, this is exactly what I want. You have to be very descriptive, and then also kind of like make it, hey, this is kind of like what I want, like this is what I expect, or here are the examples, and here's how you use it, and then give me the answer. And then the second principle is allowing the model time to think. So this is again, for some complex tasks, you will have to go through multiple iterations, right? So for example, like when you have a conversation with someone, it may be a complex topic. So you start with, hey, this is an example. This is kind of like how I did it, or this is what I want, or here's how let me break it down to like 3 or 4 steps, and then feed it. So you're kind of like going through this iteration multiple times to then kind of arrive at the answer. So your answer, you may get it in 4 or 5 or even 10 steps later, but you will have to kind of like chop that down and make the model think, make the model kind of like react to what you want to do, and then you start to fire up your questions or start to fire up your prompts to then start to get the right answers. The next one is, again, these are kind of like the examples of prompts. The task, again, you want to summarize a transcript, or like summarize a bunch of like a paper or like a PDF document. Summarization is one task. Say, hey, explain this, or like, can you summarize this in 100 words for me? So it just takes the content, reads it, and then makes it into 50 words or 100 words, and then give the response. And another type is information extraction. So you could feed into like a bunch of like a PDF document that has some information for you, and then you start to ask some questions on what is the background of the author, or what is the author saying, so that you're like just extracting some information from that bunch of text. Another type is question and answering, which is you feed a bunch of text and say, now I want to ask some questions on this, and you start to answer. Again, you're kind of setting the context first here, and then you start to fire up those prompts. Text classification is another. Conversation is, you might have seen in many even the Pi and Perplexity AI and a bunch of others, where it's simply you're going back and forth, and that back and forth kind of builds over time, and you're kind of feeding the entire chat history every time, so it understands the context. And the last one is the code generation. This is, as a developer, is kind of like very useful. And then also many times, the expected answers are much different. You start with, let's say, you may want a JavaScript program or a Python, or you wanted to have an SQL statement. So you have to kind of like just set the context first, make it understand what you want, and then kind of like describe what you want the model to do.
Yeah, real fast. If we just jump in and stop on that for a sec. So just like for anyone who's kind of getting a little bit lost here of the places, we've got a couple places that we can influence the model, right? And so one is like in the actual training stage. And in the training stage, that's kind of like the most expensive, the hardest, the thing that requires the most work, right? And then once you have a trained model, then you can do something like fine tune it over a specific data set, right? So like you get the model out of the box, it's not very refined. You can fine tune it and say, hey, like specifically, I'm going to be training you over examples of Rust code further, right? So that if you were going to do like the code generation and you wanted it specifically oriented around Rust or something like that, right? But then once you have this model either like just out of the box or fine tuned, then the place that you can influence it is where you're doing the inputs. And so for a lot of these things, when you have like the more powerful models, like stuff like ChatGPT, ChatGPT is based on. It can do all of those things, but maybe you're using a smaller model that's trained specifically for one of those tasks, right? So like one of the big things that was a big unlock for ChatGPT and all the chats stuff or stuff like conversations were training them over instruction data sets, because if you just asked it a question, well, then it's just predicting what the next tokens are, and probably the places where it's got the most questions are in like lists of questions, right? So you would ask a question, it would just generate more questions for you, right? So, but creating a model specifically trained over data that looks like question, answer, or question, code generation, refinement, same code generation, right? Like that's sort of like the places where on the building of the model that you can kind of influence it. But if you're not building the model, you're not fine tuning it, you're not like training it yourself, then the place where you can influence it is in the prompting, right? And so I think Arun's going to go to a couple of the different places for that.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
these specific things that he's talking about there, that's kind of like, it depends on the model, depends on the size of it, and depends on the data that's trained over. But the place that you can influence it is in the prompting, right? Because if you can kind of match it up against certain aspects of the way that it was trained, well, then you can make the model behave the way that you want it to.
Yeah, no, those are definitely great points to kind of like split the difference and how we can influence the model. And the prompts are kind of like in the last stage, or like what as an individual, as a developer, that we do, while the training and the fine tuning are kind of like typically done large scale using GPUs and stuff like that. Okay, now let's look at different types of prompting. Here are some of the types of prompting. Zero shot, which is this is like one time instruction where it doesn't have any memory. You're just simply feeding a task to the model and then getting the results back. It could be as simple as, hey, write a hello world program in Python. That's it. You're just giving an instruction. It's done by responding. The next one is the few shot descriptive or description, which is like you start to give, hey, I want you to do this, but here are the examples. Start to look at, and then see how you can do the task for me. Instruction prompting is giving a set of specific instructions. Here are the things I want you to do and how I want you to do. I want you to create a graph. I want you to do something, or I want you to plot it. I want you to write a program to do this. So be very, very specific, setting an instruction, and then you go into giving what exactly you want to do. The next one is the chain of thought. So the chain of thought, this is something what they call the react. It's reasoning and acting. So you kind of like generate a sequence of short sentences to describe the reasoning. Hey, here's what I wanted you to do. Here are the things that I want you to pay attention to, because I'm going to ask some of these questions later. So you're kind of like reasoning, or like I would simply call it priming the pump, that you just give some reasoning first, get the response, so that you're kind of like priming it to a point where, okay, now it can start to answer my questions. And then you start to answer your questions. And then another one that I found it very useful is the trigger words. Again, this is I've seen used in more on the text to image models, like more on the stability AI, stable diffusion type models, where when they pre-train or fine-tune, they kind of like put in few keywords or trigger words that you can then invoke them. Like if the model is trained on like spitting out images on like galaxy, then your trigger words can be like some words around solar system, or some words around like stars or sun or planets. So then it uses that as a trigger word. Oh, this is what you want to see, and then it kind of like uses that to then generate the output. There are also a bunch of websites already who have promptingguide.ai is one of them that you can kind of look into, and different bunch of prompts and the type of prompts. Other ways of prompting, I hinted on the React, the directional stimulus prompting. Guide the LLM towards a direction. Hey, you have this. Can you use this? Like, can you use to create a chart for me? The latest the code interpreter that is available on ChatGPT 4, it can create graphs and stuff when you feed in the data, but it doesn't do it automatically. You have to kind of just prompt or stimulate and say, hey, use this data, but I want you to plot this in a graph and show me, here's the x-axis, here's the y-axis, and show me the output, and then it creates the graphs for you. The React, as I mentioned, it's like you go through a series of steps. You start with the reasoning, and then acting, and then interaction, and then then you kind of go back to reasoning and acting, so that it kind of now knows the context, and then it can kind of use that the logic to then answer those questions. And again, this is, I think, Cody, you were mentioning before, so the fine tuning versus context injection. So the pre-training is the first level they do on training the model, and then they do the fine tuning. Either you can do it yourself if you have access to GPUs, or some other model trainer will do that. Then the last one is the context injection. The way to look at this is the fine tuning helps the model to adapt to how it communicates, and then not necessarily what it communicates. So how, I think, Cody, you gave that example where you mentioned the I want the Instruct GPT act as a conversational chatbot. So that's like how it's setting the context. It's setting, hey, whenever you ask a question, make that as a conversation, go back and forth, and then in the prompt you kind of say what is the conversation, what you want to kind of get it, and this is again, I think there are a lot of tools that are getting created pretty fast in this area, where because the model becomes really useful when you fine tune with, or when you use your data. Now that there is a difference between using your local data to fine tune, or kind of just use it in the context. So I think over the next few months, those tools will make it much easier for us to use our personal data, because personal data, or like company data, you don't want to give those data to the big AI companies. You want to kind of keep it to yourself. So how do you do that? How do you kind of use those data? Right now, the way to do it in using prompts, but I think the tools will become available to make it easier, both fine tuning as well as on prompts. All right. The other typical chatbot conversation, I'll kind of show this example when we go to Club AI, is that this is the chatbot conversation. So this is a typical chatbot conversations where you set up the role for the LLM. Typically, they have like 3 type of roles. One is like the system role, like you instruct the LLM, hey, this is the you're an agent for this, and you need to kind of act on this. That the system prompt is kind of for the entire chat conversation. For example, here, I'm saying, hey, you're Dr. Scott, patient carrier guidance counselor, and you should be able to navigate in the public sector jobs. So you're kind of setting the context in this conversation is going to go towards career guidance, people asking question about like their jobs and what to do with their career, and your job is to respond related to that. And then the role as a user is kind of like whoever is asking the question on the chat box, and then the assistant is the one that's the LLM that's responding. So now we take these roles and we keep feeding back and forth, like every time you ask a new question. So it learns the history, and then it also kind of like now you're kind of putting a guardrail and saying, okay, be within this. Now, the user may ask, tell me all the jobs that exist. Here are my skills. What are the skills that I need to, learn for this job? So now everything is kind of like, put in the context of, career guidance, jobs, and then the conversation then kind of like follows that path. And this is pretty typical on all the conversation chatbots that we see today. Even ChatGPT kind of like uses a similar similar pattern when you use their UI. All right, the next one is best practices. So this is also, again, the chatbots or the prompt is just a simple text box. So how do you kind of like differentiate certain things from the instruction, right? Like, you want to say, hey, can you write a code, or can you look at this code and debug this for me? Now you need to have a code as well as your instruction. So typically you put that code as a delimiter so that it recognizes the code or that the thing that it needs to act on separately. So you can typically use the delimiter as like the tags, or like start open bracket and close bracket. You have to have some form of differentiation so that you don't it doesn't get confused between your instruction and then the actual data. And then the approach typically is like start with 0 shot. If you don't get the right answer, then try the few shot, and then even if you don't get the answers, then it's time for you to fine tune, which is meaning you're kind of like you have like a lot of documents that you can then fine tune so that it can respond to it what you want. Give direct instructions over prohibitions, meaning there are so many things that you don't want to do, like what do you call like a negative prompt, but focus on the positive prompt. Focus on the direct instructions, because that's much easier than saying, don't do this, which that list may go a long list. From what I've seen on the stable diffusion side, like when you're trying to create images, they typically have like a negative prompts, and they're like bunch of prompts that you kind of like put in so that it doesn't create like an NSFW picture or stuff like that, so that it can take care of it. But focus on more on the positive side than the negative side. Use leading words for code generation. Like if you want the model to create a Python program, you start with saying, hey, I want you to kind of like use an import statement to do it. Or if you want to the LLM to create an SQL statement, you start to create like a select statement so that it kind of like relates to that, and then use it. And the last one is the avoid prompt leaking. So this is like at times, even without realization, we start to put some personal data in it, which you should avoid at all cost, because whatever you put in, whatever it goes in, you don't know who is looking at it. Of course, the OpenAI, I think, terms of service says they can hold the data for 30 days. But again, given everything is all getting started now, and people are kind of like getting their hands on, it is a wild west. So don't reveal any personal data, credit card information or your address, stuff like that. If you truly want to do that, then there are some tools that you can kind of like download, like an open source model, and do it on your laptop or on your servers. Do that rather than trying to use this cloud models. Cody, anything else that you have come across on to use it or not to avoid it?
No, not really. I mean, like a couple little things here, right? In terms of the delimiters, like the delimiters are huge, but then also recognize it was probably trained over, right? Was that it was trained over scraping of HTML. It was trained over like Markdown, trained over JSON, right? And so like that's one of the things that it's like, a lot of people found it very surprising how good it was at, for example, like taking unstructured data and turning into structured data, right? And like for the delimiters for that, I found that like much more effective, right? In terms of telling it specifically in the format that you want it to, right? Of that you do like backtick, backtick, backtick Python, right? Because like the code blocks that it was trained over in terms of in the markdown were probably structured in that same way. And so there's like little ways that you can get around that. And then also the tagging right there. So that's like part of it's like the HTML aspect of it, but part of it's also that there's like specific techniques that people use when they're setting up training sets, right, in order to kind of like set these token delimiters, right? And so if you know what the tokenization looks like, then you can kind of like play off of that in order to do that. Then final one for it is that the easiest place to see this is that if you prompt ChatGPT with an incomplete sentence, right, then one of the things that it'll do is before it answers the question, it'll complete the sentence. And the reason why is because the way that the model is generating everything is based off of the tokens, right? And so it's literally doing a single token at a time. And so in order for it to get to the answer of this is how you what's called like I am a large language model, and as such I cannot give you the answer that you want or whatever, right? Is like in order for it to get to that thing, the part that it's normally trained over is a complete question. And so it'll finish up what you were putting in originally, and then it'll give you the answer for it, right? Because it's doing one token at a time.
Yeah, no, yeah, right. I think in some cases, I think when you play with the open source LLMs, like you get more information, as you said, like how they are trained, the data set, and then you can use that. I'm hoping in the next few months we are going to get more of that, so that we have more handle on it, and then use that to then play with it. Yeah, so there are definitely if you're new and if you want to kind of like play with the prompts, there are definitely good sites already. Like Prompt Hero is one. They have captured many of the ChatGPT as well as the text to image models. Flow GPT is another where you can kind of like they have captured many of the prompts. And then definitely recommend the deeplearning.ai short courses. They're just simply prompt engineering for developers. That's a good place to start, just to kind of understand some of these principles, some of these, if you're kind of like, if you want a textbook version of what is prompt engineering, I think that course is pretty good to get the knowledge of. And then mostly like after that, you're on your own, which means that, you do your stuff. And Cody, I know you mentioned on the podcast that you have kind of like a cheat sheet or like your own kind of like a sheet to kind of like capture. And I kind of like do the same where whenever I find something, hey, this is new, like I did this and then this was the answer. So just capture that that interaction, put it in your notepad so that next time you can kind of like look at.
Yeah, no, having kind of like a suite of really good prompts, like super prompts, are super useful. And the guys I think's been doing the best work on this is Brian Rommel, who runs Read Multiplex. And so he comes up with these really, really great super prompts for it. But I think this is like a good lead into like maybe you could do a quick demo of Plug AI Chat, right? Because for those ones, like you're basically coming up with different personas for the model when it's helping you, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let me okay. All right. Are you seeing this?
Yep, just added it to the screen.
You're able to see it, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So yeah. So just to give a quick overview, when I started into this, obviously the first place was the open AI, or aka like closed AI, and their ChatGPT Plus. You kind of like pay $20 and then you start to play with. But then quickly you realize there are like a lot of limitations and stuff that you cannot do there. So then I started looking out. Okay, they do have the Open AI API, and you can just get the API key to do it. And that's when I stumbled upon this. Is one of the UI is an open source made by a group of people. They called Big AGI, and then what they do is, you can just simply run on your local the UI, and then you just simply put your own API key, and then at least now you have some more tools that you have to play with. Then I was like, okay, I don't want to, I want to learn these prompts and they learn these things, but I don't want to pay like every time like OpenAI some few cents to kind of learn it. What are the other ways, right? So that's when I started looking around, and then found like Frame AI. What they do is they actually host, or they provide the tool that you can actually host the open source LLMs such as Falcon 7B or Instruct 7B. There are a bunch of open source language models that are on Hugging Face, but you kind of trying to install them on your own and doing it is quite complex. So Frame AI have done a really great job of making that seamless. And now what they have done is once you kind of run that on your on your own server, then you can use the same OpenAI API APIs to interact with those LLMs. So now with that, because it's a local LLM, your data is not going anywhere, and you're running the UI on your own. So pretty much you have full control over end to end. Because again, privacy in this space is pretty needed, and right now, none of them provide that or provide any guardrails. So that's how I started with this. And then I said, hey, not everyone will be able to run this on their own and then run the Frame AI dashboard and local models. So why can't I just put this as a website so that anyone can come on board? And that's how I started putting it. And obviously, like the hackathon definitely was another push for me to release it. So I did it, and my thing is to keep adding these agents, and these agents are nothing but as I showed on the chat or on the presentation, that you have to set a context on what it is, and then you kind of start to interact. So essentially, that's exactly what I'm doing with each of these agents. For example, the developer agent is nothing but, I'm saying, hey, you are a programming assistant. Now, whatever question I ask, try to answer it with in a programming angle. And then for a tech therapist, it's completely you're like just give some motivational quotes and stuff like that. English teacher is you ask a question around English language, and then it tries to correct your grammar or kind of gives information. Personal trainer is again setting the context on healthy meal and coming up with the workout plan, and all these are again very experimental right now, and then obviously these are completely open source LLMs that are running, and for sure I am not recording any of these your interaction. So you can completely play with it. It's completely free, and that's for example, you can just if you're a new developer and you want to kind of play with hey, I want to kind of learn the Python code. You just simply do that. Obviously, it's going to take a little bit of time because it is running on a CPU and not a GPU. And then, but you will kind of get the answer. The system prompt is what I mentioned before. So this is I'm setting the context on my own before, and that's why it's saying you're a sophisticated, accurate, modern AI programming assistant. And it's to kind of it takes about 20 seconds to run through the models and then get the response.
Yeah, and if anybody hasn't seen the difference between these, like you're saying, right, is that this is running on a CPU, and that's why it's not going very fast, right? So you can get some of these things when they're really small, you can run them on the CPU, and they're okay. I mean, I think the Replit 30 billion is that something that running on a CPU and is able to get 5 tokens per second or so.
Yeah.
But if you really want to get these things performant, you need to run these things against GPUs. Right.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, you're right. the CPU is okay, for you to wait and then kind of like get the response. But yeah, GPUs, will crank up. And that's kind of like, how the difference is. So here, now I did also add the ChatGPT GPT-4 so that, people can, you don't want to spend like $20 or you don't want to kind of like give your email address to OpenAI to kind of like register. You can simply use SATs to access it. So the way that, you can ask the same thing here. So I'm going to just copy this and say I'm going to say, write a hello world program, and this is it invokes the get Albi payment. I'm going to say pay now, and then obviously this is cranking up in 2 seconds. So again, the prompt, whatever you're putting here, is actually going to ChatGPT or like OpenAI, and their terms of service says they will hold the data for 30 days, and after that, but they won't, your data won't appear in other training thing. But for simple things like common things, like you can still use it. But the key to understand here is you're not giving an email address. Your location is not tracked. If you go to the Open AI, the ChatGPT app store, to see, like, pretty much they're collecting your location, your contact information, your all that. So that's what is kind of like linked to your chat conversation, which I wanted to avoid with the plug AI. Like, let's completely run the other way around and not have anything from the user, and then give that option for anyone to try it. Cool. And here, let me show. I've kind of like put in some examples already, so I want to kind of like show those the examples. So yeah, so this is one example where I start with, can you write a SQL statement to retrieve data from a table, and then right away it wrote the SQL. And then I said, hey, can you write an import statement to retrieve all data from the table? So now the only difference is I'm not saying, write a Python, code. I'm just saying, write an import statement. That's kind of like a trigger word. And now, it kind of like understood that and said, okay, you're trying to do an import statement. Typically, you only do select, but, let me do that. And then it created a Python code for that answer. So this is how you just, by simply changing those keywords, you're now able to get completely different results. Mm-hmm. And let me give you another one. So this is another one where this is one of the text to image prompt that I was playing with, and said, hey, can you use this following prompt to create 10 new ones, right? So I gave the prompt. What I truly wanted was, this is to create one of the text to image. Now I want 10 different ones. So can you kind of create in this format? Now, it did create the output, like 10 different prompts, but then those prompts weren't in the same format that I wanted, right? So, it kind of like gave a 10, but completely different one. I cannot use this, directly onto that text image created. So instead, I just changed that and said, I gave an example. I said, can you use following prompts to create 10 new ones? So now I just didn't give one. I gave like 5 different and said, hey, here is kind of like the thing that I'm looking for. Here are the examples. Now create 10 for me. And now right away, it understood that, okay, you're looking at this format, and then it just created 10 different prompts that now I can directly plug them into. Now think of this as like a chained auto GPT or auto program, where the text model creates the prompt for you, and then use that to create the image. Now you can kind of like create like infinite amount of images that you want, a different one that you want. But the simple kind of like giving an example completely changed the output that I was looking for than the previous example. So that's, these are, again, once you kind of like try to once you play with it is when you will kind of like learn. Once you learn, then you can kind of like clearly use it
Yep.
for later.
Yeah, that's that few shot examples.
Exactly.
We're talking about, right?
Right. And then here, like, this is, I think I was kind of like coding on TypeScript, and then like, I was not, there was like I asked to create the TypeScript object for it. It created, but then I didn't want that variable. So this is kind of like, like a longer, chat back and forth. And then, but then in the end, like, exactly, created, because it's always like, creating like a decoding program to decode a JSON object or a nested JSON object is one of my nightmare. And, here you have the answer in few conversations.
Yeah, and something to keep in mind also is that the way that these conversation bots work is that remember the model is stateless, right? And so when you're doing these longer conversations, it'll take the entire conversation and run that in again, right? And so like the things you have to consider when you're doing this is that you might run out of context, right? And so basically you can think about the context window is a couple thousand tokens. And so if you have like 100,000 token conversation, but the context window is like 8,000 tokens or something, it'll only get that bottom 8,000. And so it'll lose a lot of the context for what happened previously. But also, if you start going down in the direction that you don't want, of that, like the model is bringing you down, if it's giving you a framework you don't want, or it's giving you answers, or like it just keeps insisting on doing this thing like that, that's why you want to basically like, hey, wipe out the previous history over there, maybe get like a brief summary of it or something, and then take that and then plug that into a new thread, right? Because like the model is completely stateless for this. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You might have, like, I've several times I've tried, like, gone through the direction that I don't want to, and then giving up. But then I think your approach is better, that you just summarize it, close that thread, and that's why like right away you can kind of like go back and start a new thread, and now you're kind of like taking it in a different direction. And then that's one of the things that why I created the custom here as well, that if you want to set a context on your own, you can do that. Like you can just type in your message saying, hey, be the guide for me, like a travel guide, or like set the context, and then you can then start to do the conversation.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, this was great. Awesome. Arun, excited to see how this progresses further. And yeah, thanks. This was awesome.
Yeah, no, it's definitely good session to share what I've learned, and definitely there are a lot more to come. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks.